Hello and welcome to this Micro Focus ZENworks configuration video demonstrating the ZCM Zone database migration. This series of videos talks about the database migrations and different options. This particular video in the series demonstrates migrating from a ZCM 2017 with an internal Sybase database to an internal PostgreSQL database using the ZCM 2020 installer ISO that has the database migration tool built into it. In this database migration video series, the first one is details on the database migration options. Be sure to watch this one. It has all the details. The next one will be a demonstration using the DB migration tool, demonstrating how to upgrade ZCM 2017 with an internal Sybase to an internal PostgreSQL. The next demonstration is using ZCM 2020 installer ISO to upgrade ZCM 2017 with an internal Sybase database to an internal PostgreSQL. And the final one in this series is a demonstration using the DB migration tool on a ZCM 2017 with an external MSSQL database to internal PostgreSQL. Some of the overview is first reviewing the ZCM database migration option details presentation, which is a separate presentation in this series. Walk through the upgrading of ZCM 2017 Zone with Sybase using the ZCM 2020 installer ISO, utilities and commands, troubleshooting, and resources. Let's have a walkthrough upgrading our 2017 to 2020 without having done the database yet. We'll see what Sybase triggers so we can see how that actually responds, this installer. We're going to look here and we can see that we have a Sybase database. We can see that we are currently running on 17.4 with a built-out zone. So we're going to go ahead and some of the things that we want to have in place or we want to check out ahead of time is the ZENworks documentation for 2020. Part of that is, do I install, upgrade, or update? So it explains that in that particular documentation. Another documentation is the system requirements to make sure you have your system requirements in place for the database, for your devices, your hardware, your primary server, your satellites. So you want to make sure that everything is supported going to 2020, as well as the ZENworks upgrade process itself, either upgrading the primary servers or migrating the appliance. Those types of things are listed in the documentation. So be aware that that's there, as well as the cookbook. The cookbook will take you to those particular documentations through the link on the TID itself. So know that that is available to you too. The database, if you're looking for different instances of the database, whether it's system requirements or best practices, troubleshooting, there's some notes in there. ZDCs have links to the ZDCs should you need to run the ZDC prior to, and we have run the ZDC prior to on this particular zone. So know that the cookbook's there, and then also your entitled software. If you go to your software ZENworks suite, you can get your keys so it doesn't hold up your install should everything be compatible. So next we're going to minimize this. We do have the D drive is mounted with the 2020 ISO, so we're going to run setup. This is going to kick off the install anywhere. We'll go ahead and select our language and then we'll hit continue. So it's going to guide us through the 2020 installation. It hasn't even done the check for the database yet. We're going to accept the license agreement. Does a regular pre-checks as if you've checked your system requirements, and it just kind of responds to that about the network warning, DNS, and in my case I'm not using it, and insufficient memory. I have 8. Remember the supported for 2020 is 16, especially if you have the Vertica database. It's required. We'll leave it at 8 and move forward because we're not using the Vertica database. It's asking the normal questions. Is this a first server to be upgraded in the 2020 zone? And we'll say yes. We'll go ahead and put in our credentials. And now it has the credentials to do its checking. Notice it says an embedded Sybase is not supported. So now it's going to basically upgrade your Sybase to PostgreSQL. And you can select either embedded or external. If you select external, it's going to take you through, create new, use existing. If we continue through this, it'll ask us for the server address and so forth. We're going to go ahead and do embedded. And then for the audit database, the same thing. So that was the ZENworks database. We also have the audit database. We're going to do embedded as well. And then it's going to run a quick ZDC on the database itself, not the system files, not the full thing, just the databases, so that it can do an integrity check on the tables and so forth. Those particular files are listed. Okay, we'll go to logs. Notice there's a migration in the ZDC, and then reports. So under logs, you have all the logs reporting for the migration. We'll go ahead here. Database report, we have ZPP assignment. If you're uncertain of any of the errors, please call us. This one I know is should be dropped and is a false positive for my system setup. So we're going to go ahead and basically ignore that one. And then if we go back to the audit database, we can then see that that one is complete. So we've cleared up and double checked any errors that ZDC might have brought us. We're going to then make sure we've stopped all other primary services. If DNS was working on mine and I had another primary server, it would then go out and see if those services are stopped. I'm going to go, I only have one primary, so I'm going to go ahead and say stop the services. I have backed up the database. I'm going to hit next. And this is more of a GUI interface, being that it's Windows. The Linux and appliance pretty much are the same way. Now it talks about the pre-database migration summary, the management zone, and you're about to upgrade from Sybase to PostgreSQL. We'll go ahead and hit install at this point and let it run through that migration of Sybase to PostgreSQL. As mentioned, if you wanted to view the logs of this migration, we can see Novell ZENworks migration here, and that's the activity that's going on during this migration. So you can see we're getting down to the wire here, just about complete at starting the services. Notice also the data validation logs. These are the database migration between the two databases and the table migration. It'll tell you if they're successful or not. You see the ZCM database and the audit database logs. These are HTMLs. Breakdown of all the tables and the success or failure of those. So we could run the system status check, select next. You can see that the 2020 database migration has been successful, and we'll go ahead and hit done at this point. Now if we go over to our zone, we should be able to see we're at 17.4, and our diagnostic shows that we're now on PostgreSQL. And we go back to database, we'll see the PostgreSQL databases in here. Right off the database directory. And we still have the Sybase. So if we needed to revert back, common practices run on this for a little bit, a week or so, make sure things are intact. Of course, if you have to revert anything that's done in between those times of going from Sybase to Postgres and then reverting back will obviously not be saved because you're going back to the previous Sybase database. If you don't revert, then you're ready to go for the 2020 migration. That concludes the launching of the database migrator via the ISO on a Windows primary. Some directory and file locations are listed here. The Sybase database original location, the Postgres database location, the backed up Sybase database, working XML files, the backed up XML files, and again, if reverted, the PostgreSQL backup directory. Even if you revert, it'll back up that PostgreSQL. And then the ZDC comp can be used to ignore the ZDC column and table error. Check documentation for any silent migrations or use of the input properties files. That's that customization file I referred to earlier in the presentation. Login information. Supported PostgreSQL version. Embedded database, PostgreSQL 9.5. External database, PostgreSQL 10x. And then your migration logs. If you want to see what's going on or what actually transpired, the Novell ZENworks migration log is in those directories there under the logs directory. Under the logs directory, it'll have a migration directory so that you can see all the separate migration logs. Data validation logs, and those are the HTML reports and CSV files in case there's failures. And those file names are ZCM data validation status log and audit data validation status log. And then ZDC reports. You can find them in the migration reports under the timestamp. If you run a ZDC report, you'll find that quite naturally. Cleaning up of Sybase database configuration files will be done as part of the next update, just so you know. Utilities and commands. pgadmin4, dbeaver, both utilities and others can be used for database administration, connecting to the database. Again, your zman commands to back up and restore the ZENworks zone information is zman zsb, which is ZENworks server backup. And then backup and restore databases, zman db. database backup. And that's obviously if they're embedded. Database connection credentials, if you need to connect to the database with one of these pgadmin 4 utilities or dbeaver utility, feel free to run the zman DGC. If you have rights, it'll give you back your zenadmin and the long password you could use for connecting to both DGC, which is a ZENworks database, and DGCA, which is the audit database. Terminal commands. So on the terminal, you can run the Java command with the DB migration tool. There's some systemctl commands to start and stop and check status of things like the Zen loader, the Zen server, Sybase, Sybase audit, and then the Zen PostgreSQL service. And then the Novell ZENworks configure -c revert DB migration configure action command if you are reverting. Check the documentation for those details. We'll cover it in just a little bit in this presentation. Some things about reverting back to the original database. Stop all the ZENworks primary services. At the command prompt or terminal, type Novell ZENworks configure -c revert DB migration configure action. A backup of the PostgreSQL configuration will be taken. Postgres data will still remain on the server in case of an embedded database. Original database service will be enabled and started, and PostgreSQL service will be disabled and stopped. Warning again, as I mentioned earlier, this configure action of reverting the database from PostgreSQL to its original and backs up the PostgreSQL database, but any data that was captured in between will be lost. Some migration resources, TIDS documents and articles. We have the 2017 Upgrade Cookbook, which is TID 7018169, and ZCM 2020 Upgrade Cookbook, which is TID 7024089. Moving the database, ZENworks document site, there's an article out there regarding database maintenance and reference guide. So if you're moving the database from one primary to another, you're retiring a server, you want to change from Oracle to MS-SQL or MS-SQL to another supported platform, there's the database maintenance reference guide has those different options available for you. So check that out. If it's embedded, PostgreSQL database from one primary server to another primary server is an option, and that's in the documentation. If it's embedded, there's an internal PostgreSQL database to an external PostgreSQL database. So those types of maneuvers are available. Also the same thing with external. PostgreSQL, MS-SQL, Oracle. There's some processes out there under the reference guide to be able to go to different platforms, or if you're retiring a primary server, and double check those under the maintenance reference guide. There is a cool solutions migrating the OEM PostgreSQL database to an external PostgreSQL database. And so we have cool solutions out there as well to reference. So there's plenty of details out there for you to have a successful migration of your database. This concludes this Micro Focus ZENworks Configuration video tutorial demonstrating the migration from ZCM 2017 with an internal Sybase database to an internal PostgreSQL database using ZCM 2020 installer ISO that has the DB migration tool built into it. Be sure to catch the other demonstration videos in this series if you choose to have a different migration option.